Halli Casser-Jayne Show, talk radio for fine minds, airs Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, and is always available for your listening pleasure at HalliCasser-Jayne.com. Thank you so much for being here. I am Halli Casser-Jayne. Today on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a look at the remarkable life and career of one of the greatest entertainers of all time, Miss Sophie Tucker. Joining me at my table are the authors of I Am Sophie Tucker and the film producers of the outrageous Sophie Tucker, Susan and Lloyd Ecker, producer, writer, performer, director, TRAV SD, and a legend in his own right, American radio and television host, Joe Franklin. But before we begin, a brief message from our sponsors. You are listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is always available online at HalliCasser-Jayne.com and a host of venues, including Blog Talk Radio. And be sure to visit us at our newest home. We are now on iHeartRadio. Today, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show is brought to you by Audible.com, a leading provider of spoken audio information and entertainment. Listen to audiobooks whenever and wherever you want. If you want to listen to it, Audible has it. With over 150,000 titles in virtually every genre, you'll find what you're looking for. Get a free audiobook and 30-day trial today by signing up at www.audibletrial.com/The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Hello, I'm Halli Casser-Jayne, host of the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Join me Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern when I talk with the great artists, writers, musicians, politicians, and celebrities of our day. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is talk radio for fine minds. Tune in live or listen to the podcast at HalliCasser-Jayne.com. Performer, writer, producer, and director TRAV SD is the author of No Applause, Just Throw Money, the book that made vaudeville famous, which Bette Midler calls the best showbiz book, and Chain of Fools, silent comedy and its legacies from Nickelodeons to YouTube. His writings on theater, art, politics, and culture have appeared in The Village Voice, American Theater, Time Out New York, The New York Sun, Reason, and many more publications. His plays have been produced in venues throughout New York City and across the country, and since 1996, he has been top banana at the American Vaudeville Theater. Let's talk. So, Trav, who was Sophie Tucker?
Sophie Tucker was someone I would put on the short list of the greatest vaudevillians of all time. Very influential, very popular singer. Beloved, and also she was a bit of a punchline because she was a plus-sized gal, and that was a big part of her character. So, the Marx Brothers made jokes about her in one of their movies, and she had a good sense of humor about it, so she put that into her act. So often you'll find references to her in old movies and things. She was that famous, but she's largely been forgotten, sadly.
Let's go back to her beginning a little bit, because she was born in Russia, Jewish, and then the family emigrated to the U.S. and settled in Connecticut. She got her start in her dad's restaurant. Fair to say she was didn't have exactly the optimum childhood. Her dad worked her to death, didn't he? She definitely spent her childhood years kind of literally working her fingers to the bone in the restaurant. But the wild thing is Hartford, she grew up in Hartford, which is kind of a small town, but still, if vaudeville acts were going to come to Connecticut, Hartford would be one of the places they would come. So major entertainers of the day would eat in their restaurant, and among them were Willie and Eugene Howard, who are also sadly forgotten today, but they were very big in vaudeville. And Sophie started singing in the restaurant. She had what her teachers called a big personality. And it was one of the few places in Hartford where they'd actually offer that kind of entertainment with a very cheap meal. They charged 25 cents for dinner. And you'd get this free entertainment by this very gifted singer. I mean, people would... Nowadays, you would say she wasn't the best singer, but she sang with a lot of personality. So she got this encouragement by people like Willie Howard, who I think offered her this advice, maybe not being so sure that she'd take it, but she did. She actually ran away from home to join vaudeville and looked up Willie Howard, and he must have been very,
shocked. But he sent her on her way and gave her some names of people to meet, like Harry von Tilzer, who's an important Tin Pan Alley songwriter. And she actually ran out on her infant child.
I want to talk about that. First, if you're going to go down that road, let's say that her way of getting out of Connecticut was to elope, right?
Was what?
To elope. She eloped?
To elope. Well, yeah, she did. I mean, her first thing, well, sort of the main factor that keeps coming up through her life is her unusual size and her personality and stuff. So she was kind of not a shy girl, but she didn't have a lot of dates and stuff. She wasn't conventionally beautiful. So when this Louis Tuck, this kind of a flashy boy who lived across the street, kind of showed her some attention, and probably thinking that she would be a sort of fast girl, I guess, she went for it. And they, in a neighboring town, just teenagers, and then she rapidly became with child, and she was young and not ready for this. She was still living with her parents. And the boy that she married turned out not to be the most ambitious of sorts. What little money that he earned at his job, he would gamble away or spend on clothes and things. So Sophie had this child, and her life as a wife lasted a very short period of time. She had these aspirations to go into show business. So what she did was, A, she kicked out the husband, and then B, she left her baby with the family to raise, and she kind of skulked away, which she's honest about it in her autobiography, but it's still, what
it was a bit of a scandal.
A very unnatural kind of thing. But she paid in years to come. Within a short period of time, she became what was for then a wealthy person, and she supported her entire family, including her siblings, and put her son through school and all of that stuff, set up her parents for their old age.
Well, that was a good thing. Let's go back to her. So she goes to New York, gets involved in the theater. Her original performing was mostly doing blackface, no?
Yeah, originally, and again, it keeps coming back to the fact that she was plus size. But when she first auditioned for a vaudeville theater, the thought was that and they said something terrible about it, that she was, I don't know, an ugly dog or something. But so they put her in blackface in what we today would think of as kind of an Aunt Jemima outfit with a bandana and, apron and all that sort of thing. So for her first few years in vaudeville, she was what they then called a coon shouter. And she sang ragtime songs, or songs that have kind of one foot back in the old blackface minstrel show. But later, after just a couple of years, there was an occasion when that stuff got left on the train, and then she hated doing blackface, by the way. So the instant she had a good excuse not to use it, she did, and then she forever after performed without it. The interesting thing about it is, later she's very much associated with the blues and jazz and black music. She loved that sort of thing, just in a different way than sort of impersonating black people with blackface.
That was the point that I wanted to make sure we made, because that's going to play into her entire career. She was no Fanny Brice story. I mean, in fact, she did go with the Flo Ziegfeld found her, hired her, but that part of the story didn't have a happy ending. What was that story?
Well, Sophie Tucker was what they called a singing comedian back in the day, and there were people who came ahead of her who were bigger stars, and she would ultimately be as big as they were. But when she was hired for Ziegfeld Follies, she was still up and coming. And what happened was they assigned her this kind of jungle number that was kind of a showstopper, and she was wearing a leopard skin or something, and riding the back of an elephant. And the putative stars of the show, first it was Nora Bayes, who was the hugest star in vaudeville of the day, urged Ziegfeld to cut the number. And then Nora Bayes was replaced by Eva Tanguay, who was the other hugest star in vaudeville. And Eva Tanguay had Sophie fired completely. So if you look at IBDB, which is the database for Broadway shows, you won't see her name under that edition of the Ziegfeld Follies, which I think was the second edition. It was very early, 1909 or 1910, something like that. So Sophie got booted, essentially.
She got booted, probably out of jealousy. In No Applause, Just Throw Money, the book that made vaudeville famous, you say she was the first Jew to reach stardom, but her act wasn't based on her Jewishness? Did that it played nothing in her style?
Well, later it did. It's all a question of timing. You think of somebody like Fanny Brice being sort of overtly connected to her Jewishness and expressing it through her act. Sophie Tucker, a lot of her act was sort of blues related and more connected to black culture. But one of her hugest hits is the song My Yiddish Mama,
right,
which also became a hit for Belle Baker. And My Yiddish Mama, of course, is like the archetypical hugest,
the ultimate Jewish song
to
be played at every bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah and wedding that there ever was. Yeah. I'm saying that I'm Jewish. I know, I've heard it. You mentioned the fact that she didn't look like other women of the day who were stars. She was zaftig, a Yiddish word translated as hefty. She became the queen of risqué, and you write in your book about the fact that she did this double entendre, but she got away with a lot of what she was doing specifically because of that girth, right?
Yeah, it's sort of the only way she could do it. And, vaudeville was famous for being, quote-unquote, clean. It was supposed to be family entertainment. So for the most part, risque material wasn't allowed there. You'd even get fined or fired if you did that kind of thing. But it's interesting to compare Sophie Tucker to Mae West, who was also in vaudeville. Mae West tried to do a lot of those risque, dirty songs, and she was always getting fired or fined, or the critics had a hard time with her because she was more conventionally beautiful and it just seemed vulgar. But the thing about Sophie Tucker is because she's not threatening, because she's not conventionally beautiful, it became comedy. And she sang about sex all the time. And sometimes it would be funny. Other times it would be very moving and sad because she often sang about sort of being jilted or, her old man's playing around on her and stuff. But it was a lot franker than the typical vaudeville material.
Of the day.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something. I want to go back to the fact that this African-American culture that she was a part of, that she heard the jazz, she heard the blues. I personally think one of the most amazing things about her was her ability to absorb everything she saw and heard. And the genius was in that she made it hers.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Well, yeah, it's funny because nowadays we think of pop stars and rock stars and country stars and rappers. They all kind of write their own material. What Sophie did was hire special songwriters or to select material that would be right for her, which is a very vaudeville thing to do. And then rather sort of than to try and be like everybody else, she cultivated her own personality, which is something she'd had even since she was a kid. So, the songs would seem to be about her real life. Actually, the mythology of their stage character was probably a lot more sexually active than the actual Sophie Tucker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but she sang songs like There's Company in the Parlor, Girls, Come On Down, which sort of alludes to like a sort of prostitute-like lifestyle. I think she was probably not that wild.
Yeah, probably not. She introduced so many famous songs that I guess people probably don't know that. Like, I know one of them was Shine on Harvest Moon, although Nora Bayes made it famous. She was the one who sang it first.
Yeah.
Right? And here's another one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
After You've Gone, that's another one she did, and I Ain't Got Nobody is another one she did.
And Ain't She Sweet?
The Last of the Red Hot Mamas is what she was called, and that became her anthem at a certain point, and that's a famous song. And then, Some of These Days?
That became
probably her first theme song by the African-American songwriter Shelton Brooks.
Great song. Still good. Yeah. That one holds up. She also says that she introduced the shimmy. I'm laughing about that. I remember trying to do the shimmy when I was a kid.
There were probably like 10 different women in vaudeville who claimed to do that. So, and they all called themselves the Queen of Jazz or the Jazz Queen, and they all kind of said that they introduced the shimmy. They probably all did it at around the same time. It'd be very hard to say who was first.
Who was first? That certainly was racy. So bawdy, racy, provocative, sexy. She just had it all. And she had a way with words. I'm thinking about she just had some quips that were hilarious. But one of them, I think people probably don't know, came from her. And we use it all the time. I've been rich and I've been poor, and believe me, honey, rich is better. Can't argue with that.
Yeah, totally.
Is that her?
Yeah, I believe so. And she was pulling down, women in vaudeville were the highest paid entertainers and among the highest paid women in the whole country. So she'd make $3,000 a week, which back then was a lot of money. It's probably like 10 times that amount in today's money.
Jeez. Yeah. She had a lot of husbands. Yes.
She did, yeah. And that's actually my brain went there too. After we mentioned the money.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, her second husband in particular was this guy Frank Westphal, who was her accompanist, and it's a bit similar to the Fanny Brice's story, which is more familiar to people. It can be kind of hard on a husband when the famous and rich and the person everybody wants to know in the relationship is the wife. So he took it pretty hard. He was her piano player, but they grew apart, and he was unfaithful to her and so forth. And then she, to make him feel better, she bought him a garage, because I guess he liked to tinker with cars, but it was called the Sophie Tucker Garage, which did not do a lot for his self-esteem. So they weren't married for very long.
Here's another thing about her that I think is fascinating. We can only look back at footage of her now and see who she was and see the style that she, put out there. She had friends everywhere, including kings and queens. I think Princess Elizabeth, young Elizabeth, even sat on her lap at one point. And she Al Capone. And there was nobody, presidents, mobsters, and even Ed Sullivan loved her as bawdy and as racy as she was. Tell me what did she have?
Well, yeah, if I had to choose one word for her, the word that always comes into my head is lovable. You just kind of want to put your arms around her.
Oh.
Maybe because she's honest but really vulnerable, and she chose these songs that sort of brought that out in her. So she sounds sad, and when she's funny, she's self-deprecatingly funny and sort of naughty. So you really get a sense that you know her, even though you might not. And the British, it's interesting to me, starting in the 1920s, the English, she started going over to England every year, and they love her just as much, if not more, than Americans did. In fact, her career very much intertwined with vaudeville. So when vaudeville died here, she kind of lost one of her major platforms. But the music hall in Britain lasted a couple of decades longer, so she really had a forum over there to perform. And they, of course, in England, they love double entendres, all of those music hall songs, or naughty, eye-winking tunes that are really about sex, but maybe kids might not hear that.
Right.
So.
Yeah. She never stopped evolving. She adapted to what the times called for her as an entertainer. Yeah. Isn't that true?
Yeah. Well, one thing is if you do a search for her on YouTube, you'll find plenty of TV work in the 50s and 60s. And in her later years, what you'd compare her to nowadays, I think, might be Tony Bennett. The way Tony Bennett is very much
still
in our pop culture. Right up until she died, Sophie Tucker was a familiar sight on TV, like the Ed Sullivan Show or panel shows or game shows. And even the Beatles made jokes about her. They called her their favorite American group, which was a weight joke.
Yes. I think I got that. It's interesting to me that she did bridge so many gaps in so many generations, and yet somehow she fell off the face of the earth in terms of our culture. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because it mostly has to do with movies. And I keep getting the sense she did a few book shows on stage, but just a very few, and then very few movies. She starred, in talkies. They tried all the big stage stars out when talkies came, and she was among them. She starred in a movie called Honky Tonk, but it didn't do well. I get the sense that she was not good at speaking lines. She's good with a musical act, but not so good at dramatic acting or comical acting and stuff. So we don't, unlike, say, Eddie Cantor or Al Jolson, she doesn't live on in lots of movies that we can watch. She's kind of plays herself in cameos in a handful of Hollywood movies. I think that's a major reason.
She died in 1996 of lung cancer, but not before the girl who left Hartford in disgrace returned, as we say, to her hometown in triumph. Her legacy to showbiz, certainly she's had enormous influence on some of her contemporary performers. I'm thinking, obviously, Bette Midler, who even named her daughter Sophie.
Yeah.
I think of Cher. I think of her. What's the deal here? Her legacy to showbiz, her importance in the lexicon of entertainment, and to all those wannabe performers out there, what could they find in Sophie?
It's, just larger than life, Yeah, that legacy stretches from, like, cabaret people, show folk, to like rock and roll people like Mama Cass, for example, very much working as Sophie Tucker kind of thing in her act. Yeah, it has to do with being this mythological being and this great crafting of an act that encompasses music but also patter and the clothes. You have an instant visual picture of her, once you've encountered her. Probably the best way to experience Sophie Tucker nowadays, I think, the TV clips are fine, but there are lots of record albums that you can buy, CDs, and just hear her on record. It really shines through. Her personality translates very well.
I've been speaking with TRAV SD, author of No Applause, Just Throw Money, the book that made vaudeville famous, and Chain of Fools, silent comedy and its legacies from Nickelodeons to YouTube. For more information on TRAV SD, visit his website at travsd.wordpress.com. In 1973, Ithaca College students Susan Dinner and Lloyd Ecker went on their first date to see an up-and-coming new singer named Bette Midler. Over the course of the evening, the couple fell in love with the divine Miss M, her Sophie Tucker jokes, and each other. In the last 40 years, the Eckers got married, had 3 children, and developed babytobee.com, the online website for information and services related to baby planning, pregnancy advice, and support for new moms. It was the sale of that business in 2006 that allowed Sue and Lloyd to pursue their passion for bringing Sophie Tucker's life to the page, stage, and screen. And pursue it they did with the same gusto they built their baby business. With one book, the first in a trilogy about Sophie Tucker's life, I Am Sophie Tucker, and a documentary, The Outrageous Sophie Tucker, already under their belts, the Eckers now intend to take Sophie's story to Broadway with a musical, to Hollywood with a film version of that musical, and to the small screen in a long-running television drama based on her unbelievable 60-year showbiz career. Let's talk. Okay, you guys, this is really something. Fair to say that you're the ultimate Sophie Tucker fans? I mean, if she were alive today, you two would be groupies, right? What is it about this woman that got you so fascinated, or is a better word obsessed? Talk to me.
I'll tell you. Back in 1973, we both were at Ithaca College, and Lloyd's job was to get concerts to the school. So he had a little competition from Cornell across the hill, but he finally got a promoter to call and say, we have a cancellation. Do you want this concert? And he said, yes. He doesn't know who she is, but send her. It was a new singer. Well, that concert was our first date. So the reason we're obsessed is because that date, he gets up on stage to introduce the concert, and he says, okay, everybody, give a warm welcome to Miss Bette Midler. So that's our first date. And then after the concert, we had dinner backstage with Bette Midler and Barry Manilow. So I thought, okay, I'll go on a second date. And and then after, so fast forward 35 years, we got married. We had 3 kids. They all went off to college. And he sells our business. And he comes home with the check and he says, okay, what do you want to do now? I said, well, first I want to put that check in my checking account. But I said, after that, I really would like to have dinner with Bette Midler again. And he says, oh, I have a better idea.
I said, why don't we find out who this Sophie Tucker is and then do a documentary about her, then write a book, which is now turned into 3 books eventually, and then turn the first book, which is her early life, into a Broadway play, then turn the Broadway play into a Hollywood musical, and then hire Bette Midler to play the part of older Sophie. When she wins the Academy Award, then we'll have dinner with Bette Midler again.
So I love it. And that's how it all started. And we'll get to whether you do or you don't at the end. But you two get things done. That's what I've spent a little time, researching you guys and trying to figure out who you are. We all dream, but you guys seem to have captured in some sort of bottle the formula for making dreams come true. I mean, first with Baby to Be. And tell us about Baby to Be. I mean, where does this drive come from? What's the story here with the two of you?
Well, I married an entrepreneur, and the definition of an entrepreneur is a crazy person.
Love it.
Because I have to admit, I must be crazy too, because I went along with all of these crazy ideas. But Baby to Be was when I was going through my pregnancies, Lloyd felt very left out because he didn't show. So we came up with this idea to get a gift for the father to be, and what we did was we created this logo of a bumblebee. So we put that logo, Father to Be, with the bumblebee instead of the word be, on hats and shirts and mugs. And that we sold to maternity stores around the country. But then it escalated because once you start to think about it, the brainstorming erupts. And so then it became grandma to be and grandpa to be and sister and brother to be. And then the next thing we knew, we had a line of maternity clothes, things that said, I'd rather be sleeping, or oh, to be thin again. All of these things with the B logo.
By the way, I am showing now.
Yes.
And then the business went to bed for a while because in 1990 there was a recession, so we had to put it to sleep. We did some other things for 12 years. And then, when the internet came into play, a friend of mine said, you seem like a creative person. What else have you done? And I said, well, if somebody can show me how to work the internet and answer the following question, do you know a mother or father-to-be that wants a lot of free stuff for their coming baby? If you can get me those answers from mothers-to-be, we can give the mothers-to-be all kinds of free samples from all the baby companies. And the baby companies, in turn, like Johnson & Johnson and Enfamil and American Baby and all those different people, will pay us $1 a name for the privilege of marketing to them and give them all the free stuff in return.
God, you're a genius, too. Uh-huh.
Well, we did that starting in 2003, and by 2006, a internet company on the stock exchange called Anuvo saw fit to pay us $23 million for our idea.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Which does not fit into a bank account. But you know what made me think when I saw that number, and I thought, I wonder what Sophie Tucker would say if she knew where that money percolated from to get this bawdy, rowdy woman's name back out in the orbit. I think that's pretty funny and ironic. Yeah, right? What were you going to say, Lloyd?
I was going to say, as a matter of fact, you know, the book that we wrote, I Am Sophie Tucker, we listed as a as a fictitious memoir, a fictional memoir. And the reason we did that is because when we read her autobiography, when we first started this project back in 2006, we thought it was great. And then we did all our research. We read all these 400 scrapbooks we'll tell you about. And we realized that 85% of her autobiography was fiction and 15% was maybe true. And we also found out that it was a 10-year period from 1935 to 1945 to get it published, because the first edition was way too racy for anybody to print, and they kept dumbing it down until 4 ghostwriters later, they finally got a version they could print, which, by the way, it was great for about 100 pages, but the second 200 pages was dribble. Anyway, after all that research, now we have a book that we like to say is 85% fact, and 15% we're not sure about. We're pretty sure about it. But the main thing is that if Sophie Tucker was alive today, she would be endorsing this book 400% and saying, this is the story I always wanted to tell. And because we lived with this woman, theoretically, listened to every scrap of anything that had to do with her, interviews all over the world. We went to 5 countries and blah, blah, blah. And now we feel like we know her, and that's why we did it in first voice.
So, Lloyd, what's it like to get into bed with Sophie Tucker?
Well, you know, I married the second last of the Red Hot Mamas.
Aw, that's so sweet. I love that. And I'll bet she is. I've heard good things about Sue. So,
oh, really?
About that, I got some swampland I could sell.
No. Come on. Listen to me. I kind of knew who Sophie Tucker was. We're the same generation. You know, Bette Midler brought her to the fore. I'm Jewish. In my family, that was somebody who people talked about. I remember seeing her on Ed Sullivan and her largesse, and also her gorgeous clothes, by the way. That woman had the most unbelievable costumes of anybody, right?
Yes.
But it's curious to me as to why she isn't, until you guys, in the forefront of it all. Because look who she's influenced, and you can tell me who she's influenced far more than Bette Midler.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, you start from the beginning. Start with Jean Harlow and Marilyn Monroe. And then you go, Mae West was 10 years younger than Sophie. And so to answer your question, because Mae West was around, she was young enough when movies came out, she became the sex symbol in the movies. Sophie was already in her 50s by the time movies came into the forefront. And so they wanted to stereotype Sophie into the grandmother role or the mother role. She would have none of it. She said, no, I'm the last of the Red Hot Mamas, and I'm going to do my act, even if it's only in in nightclubs. But for the country and for the rest of the generations now, we know Mae West because of all the movies that she did. But if Sophie had been born 10 years later, there might not have been such a big thing about Mae West. It would have all been Sophie, at least in our opinion. But she influenced Madonna and even up to Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga, in my opinion, is the Sophie Tucker of the 21st century because she pushes the boundaries. She tests her limits. Now she's singing like with Tony Bennett, with the jazz that she's singing with Tony Bennett. This is all the kinds of things that Sophie did to expand her persona.
To keep current with the current days. When she was in the early 10s, in the aughts of the 1900s, she was a shouter. Then in the 10s, she started refining it and singing torch songs. Then in the 20s, she was the first woman to sing words with a jazz band. In the 30s and the 40s, she ended up having her own big band. She also dabbled in radio, but they really wouldn't let her perform there. That was the first time she ran into censorship because they wouldn't let her do her usual risqué songs, which, by the way, there were no four-letter words. We're talking about really clever innuendo. Tell that
well,
story.
Yeah, the kind of thing that Sophie would say was, my boyfriend has the biggest dinghy in the Navy. And it's completely innocent, but it's innuendo. It's more clever. But, of course, back then, they would censor that because it was too racy.
And in the 50s, she even did rock and roll. She did her own version to Rock Around the Clock.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's crazy. If she didn't smoke 3 packs a day and die at 79 years old, she'd probably be singing today.
But the thing that you're really saying about her is that what she was, beyond being this extraordinary performer, she was the PR queen. She knew how to market herself, and she knew how to change with the times and keep on going and going and going and going. And I think that's fantastic. But it still begs the question as to why she didn't, we say Mae West, but we don't say Sophie Tucker. We say Carole Lombard even. And
they were all in the movies, and that's why.
So you really think that that's the reason why she didn't?
Well,
and not only that, but even when there's no recordings because they would censor her. So how can anybody even listen to a radio recording of her? It was censored. So
we did find a lot of radio shows, but they were very bland. We found a bootleg that's in the movie, for instance, of her stage performance, and it's not bland. It's very entertaining. But when she went on Ed Sullivan the 100 times that she was on, when we both saw her, you and I and Sue, I was 11 years old, and I'm saying to myself, get that fat lady off. I want to see the Beatles. And Ed Sullivan would not let her do anything but sing Some of These Days and her greatest hits, which were very, very mild.
Right. I love it. It's so true. But, he wouldn't let the Doors sing either. So.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, right. I mean, what a tale. What a story. When you started out on this, you must have had a preconceived idea of who she was. And where are you on it now? I mean, after having done, 8 years of research, and you got to get into her files. She kept everything. Oh, my God. Yeah.
Well, the thing is that what we did is we found out in the beginning we didn't know anything about Sophie. So we read these 2 small biographies about her. That's all that there was, plus her autobiography, which was, as we said, which was bland. But in one of those biographies that we read, there was a bibliography that said, in the bibliography page, it said she had left scrapbooks to the New York Public Library. So we went down there to research those, and we found 3 of them, one from 1909, one from 1916, and we said, okay, where are the rest of them? Well, they were buried under a tarp in the basement because there was a flood. It was like Raiders of the Lost Ark. We couldn't get to them until we made a donation to the New York Public Library to the tune of $75,000 so that those scrapbooks could be microfilmed. And that's when they were unearthed. They were shipped up to Yale, where there's a microfilm place they use, and all of them were put on microfilm. And then the last part of her life, from 1957 or 8 to the 1966, those were kept at Brandeis, and those were kept immaculately. So we also microfilmed those as well. So now the full collection is on microfilm so that anybody could see it. But in answer to your question, Once we read the first 3 or 4 books, that's when we realized the kind of treasure that we had found. Because all of a sudden we saw all these letters, not just the stuff from all the entertainers that she knew, but she corresponded with her fan base to such an extent that we got to see America through the eyes of Americans from 1906 to 1966. That was such a rare thing for anybody to find. Letters from soldiers from both world wars, letters from people through the Depression. One of them, for example, said, "Dear Sophie, thank you for sending us those 2 coats. My mother was able to clothe the whole family throughout the winter."
Oh.
That kind of a thing let us see the kind of person that Sophie was, which is not seen in the newspaper articles.
She also was friends with 7 presidents, and letters were from them. She was friends with the 2 kings of England, and then she was bouncing a baby girl named Elizabeth on her knee when she was born, her honorary godmother. It just was crazy. She knew Al Capone and played cards with him in Chicago during the Roaring '20s. And then also, on the other hand, was friends with J. Edgar Hoover.
That's the funniest. Tell that story. That's great.
In the book, we tell the story of how they met. Sophie was invited to Calvin Coolidge's. She thought it was a private audience. And she went.
At the White House.
At the White House. She went with another guy named Ted Lewis that nobody remembers either. He's the guy that made the saying, "Is everybody happy?" That was Ted Lewis.
You did that well.
Nobody knows him. And they went thinking they were going to have a private audience, and they got there in the East Room, and there was 100 people. And she says, "What's this?" "Oh, this is where Silent Cal is going to walk through and say hello to everybody." But true to his name, he was silent that day. He came in from one side of the room and just was going to walk right by everybody so they could see what he looked like, but there was no way he was going to talk to anybody. And Sophie, being Sophie, thought that wasn't right, and she mouthed off and said something like, "Hey, Cal, how about a handshake for a taxpayer?" Well, as soon as she did that, the detail with the president, one of the guys stepped out of the detail and whisked her and Ted out of the building and onto the lawn. And that person who whisked him out was somebody who recognized Sophie and was a big fan of Sophie, named J. Edgar Hoover. Before he was the head of the FBI, there was something else that was called Federal Investigation Bureau, but it wasn't the FBI. And she said, "You're not going to arrest us?" He says, "No, I love you." He says, "Well, in that case, I'm going to give you a free pass all week." And when he came to the dressing room after the show, he wasn't really, according to the records, he wasn't really interested in Sophie so much as he was her costume. And that continued on for all of their lives until she died, all the way to 66. They were best friends. There were hundreds of letters between them. And there were also letters from the companion named Clyde Townsend. So we saw it all, and we could have unearthed that story earlier than it got unearthed if we had access to these sooner.
Oh, I love all of that, and there's so much of that in the book. I want to talk about the book right now. I Am Sophie Tucker. This is the thing. You packaged this so brilliantly. I have to give you guys credit for this. It is something she would be proud of. This is about her, and this shows like her. It's a costume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. We found so many pictures in the scrapbooks. And what we did in making the movie, we found a young graphic artist who's a friend of our daughter's who took the pictures and the descriptions from the scrapbooks, and he colorized all of her costumes so that what we have in the book, a lot of them are the costumes, but also every chapter opens with the sheet music of one of the songs that she sang, which were always very colorful. So between the costumes and the sheet music, it's a beautiful thing to see. Aside from the story itself, it's a very beautiful visual book.
Absolutely.
And not only that, but if there's another way to read it too, if they go to SophieTucker.com, we also offer a enhanced ebook version, which at the end of each chapter has videos of the people we're talking about from the 20s or 30s or 40s. It has audios of the music that she was singing that we referred to in each chapter, and it has a history. So if somebody never heard, for instance, of Abbott and Costello or the Marx Brothers, and they're younger than 20s or 30s, they don't need to know anybody, and they can be entertained like we were when we grew up.
You know, Lloyd, I think that Sophie Tucker would love you. you're right out of her playbook. I mean, you were like the master PR. I don't have to ask you anything. You can go and sell your damn book, and you can sell your movie. I love that about you. You know, that makes my life so easy because I'm not used to that. I'm usually pulling answers out of people. I love it. It's a joy to talk to both of you. Listen,
by the way,
what?
That's interesting you say that because, you know, when we first started reading the scrapbooks, I'm a businessman, as you know, and I also was a salesman all my life. Just like Sophie Tucker, I was also a stand-up comic for 5 years in college and out of college.
Couldn't tell.
Yeah, and Susan also was in theater for a while. And, you know, we love Broadway shows and all that stuff. We've been studying this stuff just forever. But the thing that attracted me first to Sophie, and we have a whole section in the movie. By the way, the movie is called The Outrageous Sophie Tucker.
I was just getting there. You got there ahead of me again. Go ahead.
And, you know, it's going to be opening nationwide in April. Right now we're in Florida, but just testing it out. But, you know, when we first saw this, Susan had one thought, and I had another. I'll tell you mine, then Susan will tell you hers. That was that she was a master promoter, like you just said, a master promoter and businesswoman. This woman was the first to get a percentage of the gate. Nobody ever did that before. And she thought of that, you know, and a million other things, and especially the PR. There's a whole section in the film about all the endorsements. She was one of the first. Before Babe Ruth did it, she did it. So, you know, that was my attraction, the comedy and the business. And so?
And for me, I saw her as a woman who was doing something women never did in that era.
Sure.
Taking a chance and breaking all the taboos, not just with her persona of Last of the Red Hot Mamas, but just the fact that she was an Orthodox woman married with a child who said, no, this is not for me, and broke that taboo and said, I am going to provide for my family in the way that I want to provide for my family. And so she left the home and left the baby with her sister and with her sisters-in-law, and she went out and made a living. And she sent money back. She took care of her family financially. But that was a very risque thing to do back then. That's what attracted me to her, as well as the fact that she was a Jewish woman who maintained her Jewish identity, even though she was in a business, in show business, where that was a very difficult thing to do. And one of the Jewish ethics that she maintained was her sense of charity. I mean, that's something she learned from her mother, was giving to other people. They had a restaurant, and at the end of the night, the kids were not allowed to eat any of the leftovers because her mother would go to the back door, and there would be poor people there who would be begging for food, and that's who would get the food, not the kids. And her mother was very involved in the Jewish Home for the Aged and the synagogue. But Sophie learned that sense of charity from her mother. And throughout her career, she gave away over $8 million to different, not just Jewish charities, whether they were schools or children or the Catholic Actors Fund or the Jewish Actors Fund. She gave to everybody indiscriminately. And that's what attracted me to the humanitarian that Sophie was and to the woman that she was.
And you put all that together, and you have to say to yourself, wow, what a role model. And what a role model. What a different breed of cat than we have today, even in women. I have to say, because I had that conversation earlier, I don't remember where it's going to run in the show, but with Joe Franklin, we were talking about the kind of woman that she was. Did they even make, and I use the term, as I said to him, I use the word broad, but I mean that in the nicest way.
Yes.
Right? Because you can call me a broad. I'm happy to. Hey, baby, I'm a broad. Okay. Right?
But you know what else she did, which I think is such an important message, especially today, is she said, I'm a fat woman, and I love the way I am.
Right.
And because I'm fat, that means I can give you more loving. Because I'm fat, there's a lot more of me, and there's a lot more of me to love and a lot more of me to give. So she was saying to the women that she was singing to, your body is okay. You don't have to be a pencil. You don't have to be ultra thin in order to like yourself. What a message this generation.
As I starve myself to death like everybody else does.
Yeah, bulimia, anorexia.
Right, it's crazy. We're crazy. We're totally crazy. Listen, was she a girl who did whatever it takes to get where she wanted to go, or was she tough, but her sly wit body presentation made up for that grit? Well, who did you guys decide come down on at the end, who she was?
A little of both, but mostly, like most superstars, They're ruthless when it comes to their own careers. They're ruthless in watching out for their careers and making sure nobody's screwing them over. And just like that, she, for the first couple of years in 1906 and the first couple of years, she just sat back and soaked it in. She got burned a couple of times by bigger stars because she was too good. She got fired from the Follies because she was too good in 1909 after 3 years in the business. But each time that happened, she learned from it, and she promised herself that if and when she got as big, she would never do that to somebody else. But we saw plenty of examples where kind of she did do that to other people who got big heads and thought they were going to take over shows that she was the star in. But when we saw all these stories like you're asking about, and we started reading these scrapbooks, after about 100, I realized from a business point of view that, oh my God, just like you said, what a great story of a young woman, just like we're talking about now, as a role model. And wouldn't this be terrific? First as a Broadway show, but then we realized we had so much material, even after we do the Broadway or change it into a movie, that we would have enough to do a year episodes for each decade that she was in show business, which is 6 decades. And each decade we could do 10 episodes and be on something like HBO, just like Boardwalk Empire and all the other entertaining ones, and be the next great American hero.
I love that. The film. You guys got to talk to an awful lot of interesting people. Wish I could have those people on my show. My goodness. Carol Channing, Barbara Walters, Tony Bennett, Michael Feinstein, Shecky Green is in your film, and of course the delicious Joe Franklin. But how fun was that for you guys?
It was, for me, that was the most enjoyable part. There were people who are not heard of today. I don't know if anybody knows who Tony Martin is, or
I do.
Or Ralph Young. I mean, I remember Ralph Young from when I was in the 60s. He was a part of Sandler and Young, and we interviewed these people who were in their 80s, and they are older, and they're multi-retired. But all of a sudden, here we come, and we take out a microphone and we take out a camera, and we say, okay, tell us about the time in your life when you were young and just starting out in your career. And all of a sudden, their eyes light up, and their posture is erect and energized, and they're engaged, and they were wonderful. And you could see a glimmer of who they were 60 years ago and how wonderful they were. And for me, it was just satisfying just to know that we, even for an hour, was able to engage these people and make them feel energized in the course of our project.
Even Barbara Walters, she was all business when we finally got to her, and that took 4 years. But once we got in front of the camera, she said, okay, I got 12 minutes, that's it, I'm out of here. I said, okay, and I started asking her the questions, and she had prepared herself like she would, of course. And then she said, okay, that's it. That's all. I said, well, I do have a couple of other questions. Can you tell me about your father? And as soon as I said that
was the key,
she
right?
forgot about everything. And she mellowed out, and she told us fabulous stories, which some of her are in the film. And she actually changed from the tough Barbara Walters that we all love and know to another person who was talking about their childhood. So it really was a wonderful time.
Film, unbelievable, outrageous Sophie Tucker. There's a CD. And
yes.
Talk about that briefly.
The major complaint people had when they left the movie, from when we did the film festival. The only complaint that people had when they left the movie, if they complained at all, was that they wanted to hear more of Sophie's music.
The complete song.
The complete song. We would play a snippet, and that would be the end of it. They wanted to hear the whole song. Well, that was too cost prohibitive for us to put the entire song in the movie. I mean, the rights for the music is astronomical. So what we did is we made a CD of the entire soundtrack, and it's the complete songs, and some of them are, like we said, there was a bootleg version of one of the songs that has never been recorded. So we made this CD so that they can have that fulfillment of having the whole song all together on one CD.
And there's also a 24-page booklet with the color pictures that we have, that we colorized of Sophie, and all the words, no matter what they are, the risqué words are in the booklet too, so you can actually see finally what the right words were instead of the Ed Sullivan words.
So at the end of the day, after all of this, and I mean, you're going to go for the TV, you're going to try and get it into Broadway, you've got 2 more books that are going to come out, and you're running around being fun and crazy and enjoying yourselves to death. The bottom line, what do you think she was really all about?
I walked away with the fact that there are no more entertainers like this in our lives that we're going to see. I mean, Lady Gaga, we talked about her, right? Mm-hmm. But can you imagine? Sophie Tucker did what Lady Gaga does on a tour every day of the week, 52 weeks a year, 2 shows a day. She never, she did take off a week here and a week there, and she did get sick once in a while. But when you hear that old showbiz adage, the show must go on, well, this woman was somebody like, for instance, that people might know today, even though he's gone, is Sammy Davis Jr. If you ever had the privilege to see Sammy Davis Jr. like I did when I was a kid, you saw what Sophie Tucker was about.
I've been speaking with Susan and Lloyd Ecker, the authors of I Am Sophie Tucker, and the producers of the film The Outrageous Sophie Tucker. For more information on the life of Sophie Tucker and more information on the Eckers' work preserving the legacy that is Sophie Tucker, visit their website at sophietucker.com. Joe Franklin is an American radio and television host personality from New York City, best known for the television talk and variety show format that set the standard for television talk shows. His show began in 1951 on WJZ-TV, later WABC-TV, and moved to WOR-TV, WWOR-TV, which aired from 1962 to 1993. Billed as the king of nostalgia, Franklin has interviewed over 100,000 guests during his long and storied career, among them Frank Sinatra, Dorothy Lamour, Woody Allen, Charlie Chaplin, John Wayne, Marilyn Monroe, Cary Grant, John Lennon, Barbra Streisand, Ray Bolger, Howard Stern, and Buster Keaton. He has interviewed 5 U.S. presidents. From Tiny Tim to John Wayne, Franklin has known them all, including that red-hot mama herself, Sophie Tucker. Let's talk. So what a career, Joe. Joe, what a career. What an innovator. What a delight to have you here, Mr. Joe Franklin. Does the interviewer like being interviewed? Do you?
I guess I've done it about 10 billion times before you, but I'm always ready, always in the mood to talk about me.
To talk about you, your favorite subject, huh? So listen, we're going to talk about the great Sophie Tucker in a minute, but Mr. Franklin, you've seen them come, you've seen them go, haven't you? Have you figured out why some endure and some don't?
Well, as I've always said, the main thing is sincerity, and once you learn to fake that, then you got it made. I always try to look sincere and honest. On a serious note, I never lost my boyish enthusiasm. I kept that glow, always glowing and brightly so, and I guess it's... I paid attention to what the guest was saying. I didn't look at his belly button or his nose or his eyeballs. I looked right into the man's eyes, and I got him to open up and tell me things he never said before in his whole life. So I guess I'm still doing it now on Bloomberg Radio. So I guess it's down for about 65 years. So I'm not going to quit till I get it right.
Yeah, right. I think you did get it right. You got a lot right a long time ago. You think you can put your finger on star quality? You have it. What do you think what is it? Do you know?
It's that likability factor. It's a certain smile, a certain gesture, a certain non-condescending look. You act pleased. You got to be alert. You got to, don't be snotty. Don't be nasty the way so many are nowadays. And don't look to change the pattern of what's proper or what's appropriate. And just you got to have the right vocal timbre. Got to have the right vocal cords. You got to have something special to make it say in this highly competitive era.
You are a living legend, and you have spoken with some of our greatest. That's for sure, some of which I mentioned in the intro. One of them was the great Sophie Tucker. How'd you guys meet?
Sophie lived about 2 apartment houses from where I lived on East 84th Street. She lived on 84th and Park. I was at 84th between Park and Lexington. And we'd meet in the supermarket or in drugstores, and we'd chat, and she knew who I was. She was on my TV and on my radio shows maybe 15, 20 times, and she was just a fantastic personality, great lady. She was a prolific letter writer. She would write her greeting cards or memory lane birthday cards to everybody. When she met somebody, she would just write down the name and address, and at the proper moment, she would write them a card for their birthday or for their anniversary, whatever the reason was. She was always there with pen and pencil in her hand. She was, before today's texting era, she was just an all-out correspondent to the whole world.
What did she have? What do you think she had that made her so special?
I would call it a likability factor. A certain smile, a certain glance, a certain way of acting naughty.
Did you say naughty?
Very naughty. She was very coy, very snide, and she would always put something sexy into her songs. Even songs that she had to change the lyrics somewhat, but she was always there with a twinkle in her eye, and always prepared to make people snicker and say, "Did Sophie really say that?" And that's what she really did. She was a naughty lady. She had that deceiving way about her, very sly, coy, and very sensual. She was one of the first to get sexy. I think it was Mae West maybe before her, and maybe Helen Kane, the Boo Boo Doo Girl, and Boo Boo Doo, I Want to Be Loved by You. But Sophie Tucker put her into the big time. She really did.
So, Joe, you like naughty women, huh?
Oh, I like naughty women, yeah.
You're my kind of guy. Wait a minute here. I like the way that sounds. So,
I was doing 10 minutes away from me.
Love it. How did you feel when you were around her?
She made it like she was on my program once with Sammy Davis Jr. And somebody says to her, "Sophie, what's up?" She says, I've got 4 record labels chasing me. I got 2 movie companies want to do a movie about my life. I got all these things that are being available and being tossed at you." And somebody says, "Don't worry, Sophie, you'll get something soon." With the insult, but she liked it. She laughed like hell. So it was just a question of she never grouched, never was nasty, never was mean. Always smiling and always take on anybody who wanted to try and beat her or annoy her. Nothing would annoy Sophie Tucker. She was the greatest. She was the last of the Red Hot Mamas. She was the inspiration for many Red Hot Mamas that followed in her footsteps, and she's a legend, a living legend. Even though she's not with us now, she's still a living legend. I was an ardent, avid fan of Sophie Tucker. I loved her. I helped the people with their look, and many fond memories of dinners I had at her house, dinners she had at my house. My mother loved her, and she loved my mother, and she was a member of the family. She was very, very close with my family.
Did they even make broads? And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but one of admiration for gut and gumption and chutzpah. Did they even make women like that anymore? I don't think so. What do you think? You've been around a long time.
Did they make what, broads?
Yeah. Did they make women like that anymore? Broads like that?
No, very, very few. They were artificial, all make-believe.
Yeah. It's pretty fascinating.
Certain pattern. There's only one Sophie Tucker. She created sexual innuendos in songs, and she was the first one to really get somewhat naughty, but it paid off. Her record albums, the old albums, were going at high prices on the open marketplace today.
Question for you. Do you think she was a happy woman?
Well, is her son still around? Is Bert Tucker still around? But is he?
I don't know. I tried to find out. I don't know.
She tried to keep her son in the spotlight. Pretty well known as a writer of songs and material for other comedians, other people. I think she was a happy broad. She was a happy lady. I don't think she was really ever not happy. I know she supported many old-timers who were down and out. She used to send a check every week to a lady dancing as he fell folly. They can't name it right now, Maryland. She was very, very charitable. She was somebody who always said, "Where are you going to be Saturday night?" She said, "I'll be with you." No, in her heart, she couldn't make it on Saturday night. She had a club day, but she never learned how to say no. She said yes to everything. She was always smiling, always willing to say she would be at the synagogue or the church to give a free performance to raise money, but she knew in her heart she couldn't make it. But she was kind of cruel sometimes, but that was Sophie Tucker. She never learned how to say no to an invitation to play a benefit.
Let's talk about you one more minute. Do you get nostalgic for the old days, or are you a man who presides in tomorrow?
No, I miss the days of Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor, Kate Smith, Reed Alley. I miss them all. That's why I'm so excited about the Sophie Tucker book. She was a part of an era that is no more. In one era and out the other, you might say. She was a flaming, maybe an insignia of a time that was the best time to be alive, the 50s, the 60s. And she was, in the 20s and 30s and 40s. She dominated the whole show business scene. When she faded a little bit, she got by on her memories, on her nostalgia, on her old-time songs. But she was past or present. She was always Sophie Tucker. She lit up that stage like nobody did, ever.
So, listen, like I said, as I started this, you've seen him come. You've seen him go. Look at you. How old are you now?
You know what?
How old are you now?
85.
85. You've been around this planet for all those years, and you've been on the air just about as long as you've been alive.
I was waiting. Johnny Carson said I was sitting around waiting for Marconi to invent the tube.
Oh, God.
I'm not going to quit till I get it right.
I think you got it right. But I have a question about getting it right. When you look back at all those wonderful people that you interviewed that I named in the beginning of the show.
I had Ronald Reagan 5 times. I had Charlie Chaplin. I had Sophie Tucker about 15 times. I had John Wayne. I had Cary Grant. I had Bing Crosby. I had, I mentioned John Wayne, Cary Grant. I had Charlie Chaplin. I had Bing Crosby twice. I had Frank Sinatra twice. I had 500,000 guests.
And you can still talk. That amazes me. That's totally amazing. But when you look back, do you ever say to yourself, geez, do you go over the interviews and you say to yourself, God, I wish I hadn't asked him that, or I wish I had asked her that? Do you ever go back and say, geez, if I only had one time to redo it, which one would you redo?
Well, there's so many I would redo it. One time I said to Rosemary Clooney, I saw Jose Correa last night in Man of La Mancha. She said, we're not married anymore, Charlie. I said, listen, first of all, my name isn't Charlie. My name is Joe. And second of all, I just wanted to point out that I didn't know your ex-husband was such a good singer. He gets up and just walks off the set.
Oh, you're kidding. Tell me more.
Later on, she came back. She confessed she was going through a nervous breakdown. At that time, she said she apologized. We became very good friends after that. So you get these little temperamental flashes now and then. One time I said to Jerry Lewis, I said, Jerry, how's Dean Martin? He says, no one, they called you the nostalgic kid. We broke up 10 years ago. He took a swing at me, and then I found out that he had to not get up that early in the morning to plug the movie or both. So we made up, we hugged and kissed again, so we're friends again all over again. But you gotta understand the temperament of these stars. They'd rather be home in their snug little apartment enjoying life. Somebody says, look, you want to sell books? You want to sell movie tickets? You got to go on make the rounds of the talk shows. That's very important. So just got to live with it that way. That's all.
Your advice to the up-and-coming, quote-unquote, stars, celebrities, because I'm not sure we have stars anymore. I think what you and I miss are stars, because what we have today are celebrities. And I think there's a difference, don't you?
Yeah.
Right?
The superstar like Sophie Tucker, you got stars, but they come and go. You got your Taylor Swifts, you got your Bette Midler, they come and go. So it's just a question of enjoying the limelight while you can. Of course, the salaries, Sophie Tuckers, Judy Garland at the height of her fame, when she made the Wizard of Oz, the salary was $500 a week. Today they get $30-40 million in advance on making a movie. So it's become quite a pretty lucrative proposition for those who achieve that goal. But it's still, as you say, it's not the celebrities are old. Different kind of celebrity today.
Is it true that you have 60,000 old records piled away and labeled and boxed?
Maybe 100,000.
Is that true?
I played them on radio and WOR all night long for 50 years. Midnight to 5, Joe Franklin's Memory Lane. When I quit, nobody could believe it. It was so sad they cried, but I figured that was enough. But I've got maybe 100,000 LPs, old time 78s and 33s. Big collection.
Big collection. I'd sure like to get my fingers on that. I grew up on you and $1 Million Movie on WOR. You are a legend. Thank you for being here. I've been speaking with Joe Franklin, the king of nostalgia and one of the kings of the talk show biz. Franklin once said, it's nice to be important, but it's even more important to be nice. Joe Franklin, the epitome of nice. Franklin has a biography floating around out there. Well worth the read. Up Late with Joe Franklin. For more information on Joe Franklin, visit his website at joefranklin.com. Before I go, I want to remind everyone that podcasts of current and past shows are always available to listen to free on iTunes under the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is also available for download via Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, BlogTalkRadio.com, and a host of other venues. Google the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, and you will find us. Of course, podcasts of our shows, both past and present, are always posted for your listening pleasure at HalliCasser-Jayne.com, which I hope you'll visit often for the latest information on our upcoming segments. Oh, and while you're at HalliCasser-Jayne.com, don't forget to visit my blog to read my latest musings. I'll be back next week, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, for another edition of the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, Talk Radio for Fine Minds, brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at www.audibletrial.com/The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Audible.com features over 100,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Stay in touch, won't you? Remember, that's HalliCasserJayne.com. Discover us on Facebook at Halli Casser-Jayne and on Twitter at HalliCJ. I love to hear from you. So, till we meet again, this is Halli Casser-Jayne. It's a wrap.